Hello there, I'm Callum and welcome to the EU in Review, where I review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. And this time, I'm finally back to the novels with X-Wing Rogue Squadron. And I'll start, as always with the novels, with the blurb. Join the most elite fighting force in space on a do-or-die mission only the X-Wings would dare. They are sleek, swift, and deadly. They are the X-Wing fighters, and as the struggle rages across the vastness of space, the fearless men and women who pilot them risk both their lives and their machines. Their mission, to defend the Rebel Alliance against the still powerful, battle-hardened Imperial foe in a last-ditch effort to control the stars. X-Wing Rogue Squadron. Its very name strikes fear into enemy hearts, so when Rebel hero Wedge Antilles rebuilds the legendary Rogue Squadron, he seeks out only the best, the most skilled, the most daring X-Wing pilots. Through the arduous training and dangerous missions, he weeds out the weak from the strong, assembling a group of hard-bitten warriors willing to fight, ready to die. Antilles knows the grim truth that even with the best X-Wing jockeys in the galaxy, many will not survive their near-suicidal missions. But when Rogue Squadron is ordered to assist in the assault on the heavily fortified Imperial stronghold of Black Moon, even the bravest must wonder if any at all will survive. So this is obviously written by Michael A. Stackpole, and it was published in 1996, before the prequels, because The Phantom Menace, of course, came out in 1999. So, I'll begin with my notes that I take as I read through it. This is the first appearance of Corran Horn after Interlude at Dark Now, which is a short story, to my knowledge. I like how they call the TIE's eyeballs and the TIE bombers dupes, and they call the interceptors squints. I like the little details of the nicknames that they give them, it's awesome. Gan speaking basic is nice to see, because the last Gan I encountered were in KOTOR 2 and in SWTOR, and they actually speak their own language, so Ural in this, speaking basic, is nice to see, because that means they actually made some progress as a species as well. Kara mentions Rogue Squadron at Bakura, which connects to Truce at Bakura. That little connection is on page 16. I like how it goes into some of the political scene we're setting up Rogue Squadron and what it has been built up to be after this 2.5 years from Return of the Jedi. I was getting this reputation and everything, which is awesome. This is Gavin Darklighter's first appearance, at least by release date. And I like how Akbar is featured more prominently in charge of the military. I really like how Akbar stepped forward and we get a focus on how Akbar actually is. Because in previous stories, chronologically, we mostly just see us following the big three with Han, Luke, and Leia. And those. Errol Nunn is Nir Nunn's sister, which is a great connection out there. And the sister of, if you didn't know, Nir Nunn is Lando's co-pilot in Return of the Jedi. He does the run on the second Death Star, which is awesome. Wedge is brilliant at giving supporting reasons and convincing the higher-ups to accept his decisions. And I like how all of this plays in his head. And he goes, okay, what can I do and what can't I do? And what can I do to get things together? Oh, on page 23 there are some nice connections with Tycho Selchu. And I pronounce it Selchu, it might be Kelchu. No, I like to say Selchu. He says, on Hoth he fought as fiercely as anyone, and at Endor he piloted an A-Wing that led a bunch of TIE fighters on a merry chase through the Death Star. He took them off our backs while Lando and I went in and blew the installation's reactor. He fought at Bakura and went on some subsequent missions with the squadron, then volunteered to fly a captured TIE fighter on a covert mission to Coruscant. He got captured, he escaped. That's it. And also started Wedge's gamble, and that covert mission to Coruscant is a really nice connection there, and it's explained in the next novel. which is book 2. So we just get. And on page 26, Akbar mentions he was a slave to Tarkin, which is interesting to find out. And that story may be in the comics, but I haven't read them yet, which is cool. And here we have the introduction of Curtain Law. And I love how it switches over to the Imperial side. He's an Imperial agent, and to give a bit of a story of what the Imperials are doing, leading up to a bit of drama as well with that. It's interesting how Michael Stackpole made him visually similar to Tarkin. I like that little comparison there, that people are mistaken him sometimes, at least from further away. Now on page 32, Gil Bastra, an Imperial prisoner, refers to Vader as the last Jedi. After reading Dark Forces, this compounds the impression that the Empire had everyone thinking of the Inquisitors and Vader as Jedi. And of course, in that they call Jarek and the other Inquisitors Dark Jedi, which is interesting. Even they themselves call themselves Dark Jedi. I love the intrigue it builds as it goes on. And then we have some connections with Corran Horn and Isla Wessari in the back. And I believe there's some connections there, but I forget exactly where, but I know they're connected somehow. I know Isla is later involved with Wedge Antilles, but that is for later on in the story of the expanded universe. Page 44 is a really cool one. It explains the Gans speaking their name in the third person and the system that they have there, so just find this here. On Gand, only those who have achieved great things are permitted to use pronouns for self-designation. The use of such carries with it the presumption that all who hear the speech will know who the speaker is, and this assumption is only true in the case where the speaker is so great the speaker's name isn't known to all. So of course this is Oral or Kirk, he's referring to himself, he jumps between the two, that's his two names. But it's like saying, referring to yourself as I, as basically assuming that everyone knows who your name is, and of course that is actually true. It's a really interesting perception of the English language there. The Shisavanam, Shell, is actually referred to as a wolfman, which I think is funny. It's a nice flashback to A New Hope as well, when in the Cantina they have a Shisavanam and they just called him Wolfman for ages before the species was actually created. It's nice. And I'm not sure if the species was actually named in this first or if it was in something else. Probably in West End Games material, but this is the first earliest work I think that is actually named as Shisavanam. Page 51 references back to Juicy Bakura again and Rogue Squadron's past, which is nice because it really builds on the past that Rogue Squadron has and their reputation. Page 53 mentions that Lando had his own group of commando pilots, and I believe that is a reference to a comic. Well, I haven't read it, I've seen the title of it, and it's Lando and his commandos, so that nice connection there. I love how it goes into Corran's background with a succinct description to people. I really like how it ties it all in together. If you can't tell, I like a lot of things in this book and it's amazing. I love it. They still use gavels in the Imperial Court, according to the lawyer, because one of the pilots, it's an interesting fact, was a lawyer. As you read it. And so apparently they still use the old time gavels, which I guess, yeah, draw some parallels to Earth, have gavels. So page 66 gives some statistics. Let's find him here. So it's really interesting because it gives statistics on how far the Empire's gone after Return of the Jedi. And interestingly enough, despite popular belief after Return of the Jedi, if you haven't read the books or comics, they're actually still going pretty strong, even though they're fighting between the warlords trying to take control of the Empire. So it goes on to say, by defeating the Emperor Endor, the rebellion proved itself a legitimate power in the galaxy, Within a month after Endor, the Alliance's Provisional Council issued their declaration of a new republic. The rebellion became a government, albeit one with very little in terms of real assets, and it presented an alternative to the Empire. Worlds joining the new republic are doing so on their own terms, and those negotiations are far from joyous things. And so on and so forth. I like how the dissolving of the Senate and instatement of the regional governments adds to this, so there's a whole infighting thing, but then it's also a pretty good framework for anyone who wants to try and climb the ladder in the Empire and try to take control. It really encourages that sort of thing inside the Empire structure. And of course, on the same page, it gives reference to some of the fire leaving the rebellion, with some people thinking that the Empire was completely won after Return of the Jedi. They were defeated, sorry. But of course it's not. And they're continuing to fight even harder. Now for the future, rather than just for survival. Which they go into a bit in the... and in Matches Gamble a bit, which is awesome. Page 68, they mention the Cantina fleet, which is a nice reference to Dark Force Rising, Book 2 of the Thrawn trilogy, written by Timothy Zahn. Brilliant connections everywhere. I love how they talk about the diversity and why they're politically in Rogue Squadron, because they don't just pick the Rogue Squadron members for their skill. Actually recognising that the rebellion, or the new republic as it's coming now, has to become diplomatic in order to move forwards, while at the same time they need a renewed push towards the goal of Coruscant and unseating the Empire. Because basically, whoever's in control of Coruscant is viewed as the power in charge of the galaxy. That's cool. On page 71, it goes through Wedge's markings on his X-Wing, detailing what he's been through, and how there's some Verpine numbering and all that sort of stuff of how many TIEs he's actually defeated, which is cool. 72, there was a nice little jokery dude. There's a nice little jab at Luke with 3PO. I like that. I'm going to have to talk to Luke and find out how he puts up with his 3PO unit. Wait, that won't work. I don't have a sister around here to foist a droid off on. That's funny joke. I love the description of Wedge's inspection there. And it's cool to see how Verpine, or it's cool how a Verpine can see microscopically with his natural eyes. Is it an insectoid-like species? They have different eyes. I also noticed that Wedge has an R5 astromech unit, which is a newer model. So I had a bit of a look. It takes them longer to go from an R4 to an R5 than it does for them to go from an R2 to an R4. So, here's a bit of perspective. The Phantom Menace, we see R2 droids, where R2-D2 is first introduced to the wider audience in the movies. Then, in Attack of the Clones, we see R4 P7, which is Obi-Wan's droid he has with his ship. There are a few years there. It's interesting that it goes from R4 to R5 over a few years. And it takes them longer for them to go from an R4 to an R5 of an astromech, I think. It's possible that leading up to the Clone Wars, there were more droid advancements, even just in the galaxy as a whole. Astromech numbering there is interesting. If anyone has a rundown of the timeline of the astromech numbering, that would be good, because there'd be an R3 somewhere there, but I don't remember ever reading about R3 astromech droid. Gravity of 0.05 is a nice touch, half the effects of gravity to fuel the vehicle. So as they're flying the vehicle, they can set the gravity. So Wedge has it so that you can still feel the tug, but it doesn't have any adverse effects on him, which is really nice. I like that. It was interesting to note that Thifera is a major Bacta supplier. They're leaders in Bacta production and refinement, at least at this point in time in Rogue Squadron. And the description of Curtin Law's journey and fear are great. I like that. Interesting to have a description of Coruscant. This is still before the prequels, so they were running off of the description of Coruscant from the Thrawn trilogy as well, and working that together. And having the black ribbon on the Imperial Guards is a really nice touch. Still mourning for the death of the Empire 2.5 years later. And it's really cool, the first appearance of his own Iziz on page 110. I want to read out the description because it's awesome. So, this is from Curtin Law's perspective. He stepped through them into a large room, the far wall of which was constructed entirely out of glass. A tall, slender woman stood in silhouette before it, though the backlight from the planet's surface outlined her in red. That's an awesome entrance to see, like, picturing that scene, it's awesome. Then they go in a little bit of dialogue, which I won't go through entirely. You can read the book for that. Page 116 is the first mention of Warlord Singe, at least in novels. And the description of how hyperspace is affected by astral objects is really interesting. On page 117 and 118, which I will find just now as well. Because objects with mass, stars, black holes, planets and Imperial Interdictor class cruisers exerted influence over hyperspace, they had to be navigated around. Their presence could abort a hyperspace flight and, in the case of a black hole or a star, could spell disaster for any ship that travelled too close to them. Making a trip through hyperspace required precise calculations that took advantage of a ship's speed and mass to get it safely to its destination. That's really cool, because it establishes the rule pretty much for the entire EU gives, especially afterwards and all this, and I believe in the Thrawn trilogy they may mention some of this, but I'm forgetting little details, and that's why I make notes as I read through. But they have to watch out for gravity wells, and can't just, bam, I've hyperspace jumped into here. So it's cool. And this is built off, of course, some of the lines that George Lucas put into the movies, as well as all of this is put through and given George Lucas's permission to establish these extra rules of how hyperspace and things work in the Star Wars expanded universe, which is cool. I like how they have the tension between General Sam and Wedge Antilles. That's really nice. I like reading the snappy dialogue and things between them, and it's good. It adds drama to it. It's good. And I love Iziz Nazar's deconstruction of Curtin Law. It's beautiful to see her just cutting down the size and tearing them apart, and just, it's beautiful. And we have the introduction of Mirax Terek, which I think is a great way to intro her. I love her. There's an interesting connection between her and Cohen's fathers, and I also know about her future from Wikipedia. I'm reading a little bit further on stuff, but I don't want to spoil things, at least for the book I'm not talking about. It's really cool. Now, Wedge says Alliance credits. So Sils refers to the New Republic as the Alliance to restore the Republic, and this is most likely by reflex, and it's cool because they would mostly be calling themselves a Rebel Alliance or the Alliance to restore the Republic. And they'd be saying it so often that it just becomes second nature. I like how Wedge sees Cohen and Mirax getting together from the start. Oh yes, Wedge is going, they're making a couple, they're getting along. Ooh, will they get together? We shall see. Seeing Michael Stackpole draw parallels between M-Tray and 3PO is cool. So M-Tray is the military droid they have there. At the same time, it draws some parallels. They're different enough to be different droids, and they serve different functions, which is cool. Page 161 mentions Colonel Thrawn, and also goes into more of what the state of the Empire and how non-humans and women aren't given an equal chance. But after the Endor and the Emperor's death, the survivors needed to re-evaluate and actually gave people positions more based on meritocracy, even though they still have some of that sexism and what would you call it? Xenoism in the Empire. On page 167 they have the strike cruiser Havoc, and what may be an interesting connection here is Havoc Squad in Star Wars The Old Republic may actually be a nod to the strike cruiser Havoc, which they mentioned in 1996, which is really cool. So they also mentioned an etheric rudder paddle. I was just wondering, what's etheric? I tried googling a little bit in that, but there didn't seem really anything connected to actual spaceships, rudder pedals and stuff. So going a bit like, it seems to just put etheric there to make it sound cool. Unless someone actually knows what etheric's supposed to mean in the English language in that context. Oh, and here we have a couple of little spelling gaffes. On page 176, we have an "and" instead of an "and." So, Wedge lowered his lum mug, and lum is alcoholic beverage, if people don't know. Yes, it's easy to tell from the context when you're reading it. Captain, I've been in this rebellion for as long as you have. I remember the fight at Endor, and I know the Eridane fought hard. And it should be "and," of course. Then on page 178, actually really close to each other, and it has wedged instead of wedge. Wedge glanced at his pilots instead of Wedge glanced at his pirates. Pirates? Arr! He glanced at his pirates. Nah, pilots. It's cool. So, little things that slip through the editor's fingers. In this print from 1996. I wonder if they've been fixed in future versions. If you have a different version, check it out. Have a look, see. I love reading Curtin Law's deduction of Rogue Squadron's base from the various factors, which includes fuel, because they have a limited fuel range. But what I like about them using the fuel in this book is it's not a major plot point, but it's a factor in how they perform. It doesn't drive the plot, which is nice. It's interesting that Commando Stormtroopers have slate grey armour, so they're different ones. Thinking of it, slate grey armour reminds me of the Shadow Troopers from The Force Unleashed, but they're a bit different ones. And to blend into the night, of course, because you don't want glaring white armour for that. Oh man, I love this sequence where the Stormtroopers attack the base, the Talicia base. It's like a real ground gritty war story. This whole thing it's a great war story. And I think this whole series is going to be like that. That's awesome. Afterwards, I like how it mentions the armour did save Corran's life by absorbing some of the power of the blast as well. So there we get a bit of information on how the armour actually works. It doesn't completely stop them from getting hit. It doesn't stop them from getting damaged, but it saves their life. Which is nice. Because during the time, Corran took some of the armour, of course. Because they attacked him while asleep. Yeah. I love how it goes into the aftermath of how Lou Jane Forge was killed. And it really makes the death meaningful and impactful. It's a really good story for that, even though you get the feels a bit. It mentions Luke giving the Lars farm to an alien, Throg. Then it was bought by Gavin Darklighter's father. And this is actually, Throg's first appearance was in Star Wars 3D 1. And that's a comic that was made for the 10th anniversary, I believe it was. And is only mentioned by this book otherwise. So they're referencing some obscure works there a little bit. I like how it goes into more about what Biggs was like with the aftermath of Lou Jane's death. They talk about their friend, and we get a bit more insight into Biggs Darklighter's character, which is nice. I like how they use a rash to determine where the Stormtroopers came from. It's a really cool idea. I'll just say, we need to work out where they came from, so what's an identifying feature that can happen there? And just so happens, the Stormtroopers had a rash that was a specific strain of disease that does that. Right. Yep. I like the idea. That's it. Page 216, it says, "Go Turtle." Do they know what turtles are? Well, they must, because I mentioned it. So, turtles must be just a variation of different turtles on different planets. And I love how it goes into in-atmosphere dogfights. I love reading this. I can visualise it so well, and it's amazing. It's written really well, and I love this in-atmosphere dogfights because there's so many different factors in it as well, with wind resistance and everything. It's great. I love it. I like how Wedge basically sticks it to General Sam when the plan comes through to take down the Lancer class frigate. Yeah, basically saying, my man did well, so you better watch it. You're coming. I like how General Sam and Wedge's relationship develops throughout the book as well. It's really good. I love it. And the destruction of the frigate is glorious. I love how it ends with a miscommunication between droid and human. It's only programming at all. And leaves you on a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of the chapter. It wraps up really nicely. Because we misinterpreted Corran's orders and still solved the problem. Yeah, spoilers. Spoilers everywhere. Page 237, I thought it was a funny insult. If you had lasers for brains, you couldn't melt ice with them. It's nice. I like how it's showing Imperial incompetence is causing issues. So you have some incompetence between the Imperials and not trusting each other and everything, and it's really cool. Another really nice moment I thought was that has Iziz coming onto Corran. Well, there you go. And these little bits and pieces make this story amazing as well, because you have this downtime between the action and the drama, and it's really cool. Then he turns her down after mentioning a similar experience he had in the past, referring back to Iella Wesiri. It's a really nice connection. I love how it's written and what he says. It's on page 245 if you want to just go directly to what I'm talking about. It's really cool. On page 250, Corran mentions might have been able to turn Darth Vader into a Jedi again. It may seem like a simple line at first, but then you also get the impression then that the events in Return of the Jedi are common knowledge now. What happened on the second Death Star has been spread to everyone, and and Darth Vader's redemption is a story that people have heard, probably from Luke, and it's been spread around. Page 251. Just find this one here. There's a great quote right here. There are better things to do with my mouth than give voice to speculations that dishonour her gift. We can be friends and will be friends. Out here with the Empire cutting us off from our home, what we have in common is more important than any differences that might drive us apart. I love it. I love these little interactions in between that build upon the relationships between everyone. Great, I love it. Thank you, Michael Stackpole, for giving us this awesome moments. I like how Wedge refers back to Imperial tactics against the rebels, and also brings us back to see connections between the book and the movies. So, just while we're thinking that this may not have as many connections, although it's Star Wars and everything, it just reminds us that these are the people in the movies. These are the people that have learned from surviving what happened in the movies. Wedge survived 2 Death Star runs, and he's learned so much from them. Now, interestingly, on page 25 it says, destroy all the simulator pack... On page 25 it has, destroy all the simulator packages myself. Is this a reference to George and wanting to hunt down all of the copies of the holiday special and wanting to destroy them? Alright, it might be stretching a bit far, but I like to think they put a little reference in there to that. It's fun. I like how they draw the parallels between political and military decisions and how they conflict sometimes. I like how they go into the Bothans more and what the Bothans have been doing, basically just causing trouble for people. We have the first mention of Nequivzor, we have the first mention of Dara 4, we have the ship named the Corelad, which is most likely, if it wasn't at the time, it was later, a connection to Juno Eclipse in The Force Unleashed. And I'm not sure if it was even a planet by the time of this book, but it was later, and so there's a connection. I've seen memes and warnings, but wow. The characters you get to know through the whole novel getting killed is just, it's so emotional. You get so many of the feels. But it's amazing for doing that, making you care about the characters and then causing you to go through the emotional cycle a bit with them. And, well, next there's a nice quote. Only stupid if we died doing it, otherwise it's heroism. Which is nice. On page 292, references flying against Searook strongholds. So this is back to Trisubakura, which is nice. And then we have the first appearance of the planet Borleas. Borleas. I think it's pronounced Borleas. And there's a couple more odd planets. I don't need to name them specifically, which is nice to explain on because we have Odd Mantel was mentioned, and then they have like a couple of odd ones. And they just introduce and throw names out. They use the Katana fleet to entice the Imperials, which is nice. It's interesting how it's so prominent in this story because it's used in the Thrawn trilogy, I think, and in Dark Force Rising. And they use it to build up the Katana fleet mythos a bit, the importance of it. I like how the briefing starts reminiscent of A New Hope for the Black Meat Project. It says, Wedge is 27 years old at this time. It mentions Luke abandoning the position of general, which is interesting. And I love the moments with the recent and then Mirax. I mean, I love how they're written. I love how it adds to some of the drama and behind the scenes and in the unit and everything. It's great. Jed Cred or Jedi Credit is a cool idea to connect to Corrin's ancestry, which I know about from things later on. And I like this quote from Wedge in 330. It's no good to keep fighting if I allow myself to forget why I'm fighting. Which is a nice one. I love how it goes into Mirax's feelings, and then in the same scene where it has Mirax's feelings, it propels the plot forwards. So the scene has to have a value change and a turning point in the storyline, and it does that amazingly. It doesn't waste a scene just talking about someone's feelings, but also propels the plot forwards, which is nice. Waiter mentions the fuel limitations, as he's been saying throughout the novel, pretty much. And again, I love how this is done in a way that makes sense and drives the drama forwards, rather than anchoring the story to revolve around fuel being a plot point. I like how Wedge thinks of Luke ordering him off at the first Death Star, then mimics Luke's words. It's really cool to draw the parallels there. It's interesting that Iziz and Iziz expect Rogue Squadron to make it to Coruscant. She expects it. It's a cool one. And Corrin is a badass taking down TIEs. I love reading that. All the different ways to be able to take down the TIEs and everything. That's awesome. And it teases an agent inside Rogue Squadron. And then it has my mind turning on who it could be. And even into the next novel, I'm trying to pick up clues as to who it could be, but I don't know. Please don't spoil it. So keen to read the plot and find out who it is. And I like the connection that Bosk killed Hal Horn and that Corrin captured Bosk. It's nice. And it connects some of the original bounty hunters that we see in Empire Strikes Back. So overall, Colonel Law's parallel plot is nice. I like seeing the Imperial side. I like his clashes with Admiral Devlier. It's really cool as to the drama and to showing the state of the Empire at the time. I would read a short story on Taika Salchu's defection. It's awesome. We'll still get a bit more about that in the next book, but still read a short story about that. That'll be cool. And then to his defection in general. Going from Imperial tie. It's nice. And I love the situational tongue-in-cheek humour in it, because it gives you really emotional parts in sometimes, but then it gives you some nice tongue-in-cheek humour to just make it not feel quite too bad and doesn't make you depressed. It's good. I love the parts between the action, humanising the characters, passing between the dialogue between Wedge and Akbar is also great. I have some dialogue and build their relationship, it's really cool. Writing is great, it transitions points of view really well, and describes things in great detail. Great detail because it goes into a fair bit of detail, but it doesn't go into too much. It doesn't feel like it's wasting words, it's great. I like how some of the dialogue isn't perfect, because people getting trapped and everything. It's got a more natural feeling than if every line was delivered perfectly and everything. It's great. It does a great job of building suspense, and it's an amazing story. I loved every minute of reading this, even though it took me a while to read through it. In the end, finally got time, loved it, and I'm so keen to read the rest of the X-Wing series. So, after the long notes that I did, my thoughts on it, what are your thoughts on X-Wing Rogue Squadron? Let me know what you think of it. And if you, of course, you've read it, and if you haven't read it, read it. Look, and the series follows along with the same sort of style this book is in. It's amazing, and everyone's been talking about it and how good it is, and totally agree. Love it. Keen to read the rest. So thank you guys so much for watching this. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.